Welcome back to another episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. I'm your host, Ann-Margaret, joined by my co-host, Brent.
Hi, everyone.
And today we have Roland Ruiz, General Manager for the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Roland, so this year the aquifer is making history due to the unprecedented drought, but our agency has spent the last 29 years refining its drought management plan to prepare for such a time as this. Can you take us back to the beginning and how our agency came to be and why we came to be?
Sure, that's a good question. And actually, the genesis of this organization and the mission is all about drought or managing through droughts. I mean, and it goes back to the concerns about the springs, the Comal Springs in particular, but the Comal and the San Marcos Springs going dry, like Comal did in the 1950s of that historic drought. So in our mission statement, if you will, in our statute, it says that we are to ensure continuous minimum spring flows, whatever that means. It didn't define what that means in the Act, the EA Act, but we now have a habitat conservation plan in place and an incidental take permit to cover the users of the aquifer, and that further defines what it means. And in the HCP, what the target goal is, 30 CFS, cubic feet per second of flow from Comal Springs. So that's our target, that's our goal, and our modeling is predicated on that. So as you know, there's a strong correlation between our index well in Bexar County, the J17, and Comal Springs spring flow. And so the two correlate to each other, and so our critical period management or our drought management plan is all based on that. But going back to the beginning, it's been an evolution of science. It's been an evolution of understanding, a little bit of trial and error as this agency tried different things. In the early days, there was a tremendous resistance to even managing this resource, regulating this resource this way, because it had never happened before. There were hurdles within the law to overcome in terms of Texas being a rule of capture law that adheres to that old doctrine, and it still does. The EAA region is kind of an anomaly within the state. One of the ways that I think we like to kind of talk about that is that we have perfected what rule of capture means within the Edwards region through historic use and now this permitting scheme that we have in place that has worked really well over the past now almost 29 years. So we came to be out of that, out of the uncertainty of how this resource was going to be sustained over the long term, out of fears that the population growth at the time, at the core of the region's most fastest growing area at the time being Bexar County, San Antonio, that it was going to outpace the rest of the region and take up all the water. And so it's amazing to me that you fast forward today and you see that the population is significantly larger, not just in San Antonio, but across the entirety of the region. And it seems that the aquifer continues to be sustainable in spite of those factors, population growth, in spite of the fact that we're seeing what appears to be a changing climate that's giving us droughts like the one we're in the midst of right now, very intense. It mimics the drought of the 1950s, but that drought was longer in duration. So our hope, and I think what we've projected through modeling, is that droughts of the future are going to be more like this drought. Intense, shorter term, probably followed by intense, shorter term wet periods of rain. So that's the playing field, if you will, that we're looking at trying to help nature do its best job as we move forward. But it's been a to say it's been an uphill climb for this agency going back to the early days. I mean, from the days where the EAA was viewed as, Big Brother coming into someone's backyard and intruding in something that people thought, well, was a property right, is their property, and it is, to where we are today, where there's this sense of what I've called it a conservation ethic across the region, where people now understand why.
Mhm.
You know, back in the early days, they only knew what the EA is trying to do to me with.
True. Yeah.
Now they understand, okay, I understand what you're doing at it because I understand why.
Mhm.
And so I think we've done a good job of focusing on the why, and we've had the data, the collection of data and monitoring that we've done over the years that only helps to undergird the why of our mission. And so I don't think that's going to go away. It can't go away. We need to continue to bring science to the table to validate the work of the regulatory side of the house, the policy.
Mhm.
Yeah, Roland, I've been here 16 years this month, and you've been here 19, right?
Right.
So more than half of the agency's lifetime, and I have seen changes over that lifetime. We're talking about right now is a stressful time with this drought, and you mentioned intense. I think to strike it home, we've had a couple of the driest years and hottest years in Texas history. Um, Comal Springs is reaching record lows comparable to the 1950s. It's just a really difficult time now for groundwater management. Yet, what was in place 29 years ago has been working.
Yeah.
And despite what you described, this population growth, tons of people moving here, new development, it's putting a lot of stress on the system, but the regulations and policies are holding up. And I think what you mentioned about science is critically important that our core value here, one of them is science-based. So science-based policies. We don't put into policy anything that doesn't make scientific sense.
Right. No, that's and you're absolutely right, because one of the things that was important to me when I came into this role was not just that we uphold the letter of the law of our rules, but that we understood them as to why we have them. And I remember having conversations with our leadership, if we and I think some of the terminology or language I used was, if we have rules on the books and we don't understand why we have them or what purpose they serve,
Right.
then maybe we shouldn't have those rules, or we need to redefine what they are.
Don't be afraid to change them if they don't make sense.
Right. And because I remember hearing the answer when someone would ask one of our permit holders, well, why do I need to do this, whatever this is,
Mhm.
A, B, or C? And if the answer could not be because that's the way it is, that's the way it's always been, that's not an answer. We needed to define why we do what we do. And so science comes into play there. It has to be science-based, because then it's technically defensible. And I know that, you know, at federal levels, national levels, and then along the political spectrum, um, science sometimes takes a beating. There's where we become a very cynical society, and I think all the more reason then to actually let science undergird our work, because data is data, and what we see with our very own eyes, what we're seeing right now, tells a story,
Mhm.
and we document it with the data we collect and the monitoring that we do, and it gives us a predicate for the future then, because our work won't go away. I mean, this won't go away. I mean, we're here for the long haul, and so much of our work, that's why we I reference it as generational, talking about
It
taking care of doing our work for the next generation. And it's all legacy work. It's all legacy based. And those are soft words, they're nice words, but they're not meaningful without the foundation of science undergirding them. So it's like building blocks. And so if you go back 29 years ago, we're laying a foundation of work. And over the years, slowly we've put layer upon layer. And finally we're at a place where I think that this agency and the people that we have working here really feel as comfortable and as confident in their own skin, if you will, their own EAA skin,
Mhm.
about the work that we do. I hope that's the case, or at least that's what I sense, that there's a more common understanding of what we do and why we do it. And the people that come to work for us now, I think, come here knowing that. And it's the people that are here help tell that story every day to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think apart from science, one of the big aspects that keeps us going is people. People here at the EAA and people in the community. You mentioned when the EAA first started, there was some trepidation about giving up control and starting new regulations, but over time, people have embraced it because it's been working. We see aquifer levels on the news. It's on the weather segment of any channel locally here.
Right.
That's a scientific measurement that people accept.
Yep.
There is spring flow levels that the communities embrace. I mean, I've never seen that anywhere else in the nation. It's unique to San Antonio and to this region, unique to the Edwards Aquifer Authority.
I think that's a very good point. There is such an awareness of the aquifer itself, and there's a general awareness that it's important. And I think where our challenge moving forward lies is in better describing or building understanding of the why. Why is it important? Why does it matter? Why do you see it on the news every night? And so I think that's our work of the next generation, is focusing on the why of that work. And I think it's getting easier to tell that story or just explain the why because of what's happening. If there's a silver lining to drought, is that people's attention are turned toward
That's right.
the water
Yeah.
resources, and we have an audience. We have a captive audience to a large degree that is interested in talking about it, hearing about it. And so it's an opportunity for us to start to lay the foundation now for the next 29 years or however long. So it's an unending work. But it's if you're of the mindset that's what's important to you, it can be a really meaningful work.
And Roland, kind of going back to, us talking about drought and how this drought kind of mimics the drought of record. For the first time in history, the San Antonio pool went into stage 5 back in May. Can you explain to our listeners what that really means and how our agency has prepared for a time like this?
Sure. Well, at the most basic level, of course, stage 5 equates to a 44% reduction, curtailment of permit holders and the water that's available to them to pump. And of course, that's annualized, prorated on an annual basis. Um, but what it really indicates, number one, it speaks to the severity of the drought, and it speaks to 3 years of really a significant rain deficit for the region. And recently, it seemed like when we went into stage 5, and no sooner did we declare stage 5 that we got some very well-timed rain over some very well-placed locations
Yeah.
across the region. So we saw some recharge that we hadn't seen in quite a while. And so we came back out of stage 5. Remains to be seen what we'll see over the next month to 2 months in terms of the forecast, but that speaks to, I think, the just how wondrous the aquifer is in as much as it can be sustained for such a long time, even though water's always leaving the system naturally. Uh, but when rain does come and when it falls in the right places, it just fills up in ways that you just couldn't imagine. Now we're not out of a drought, but it was just nice to see nature work the way that it does.
Yes.
Our challenge for the future is looking at ways that we might be able to enable nature to continue to do the work in a better way through what I would call nature-based solutions. The work that we're doing at our field research park to evaluate, different techniques of how to retain water on the surface and slow it down before it leaves and gets into creeks and rivers and crosses the recharge zone. All those sorts of things that are they're not regulatory in nature. They're not even really expensive per se. I mean, land's expensive to get under conservation easement, but the practices themselves are very common sense.
Like rudimentary and more.
Yeah, they're kind of, I would call them organic to the land. So, just taking care of the land in a way that takes care of the water, and that will take time. It'll take a long time, actually, but it's the ideal time for us to be doing it, I think, because of what we see happening around us with the population growth, with a changing climate, and honestly, not to boast too much about the EAA, but I think the EAA is one of the few that is really devoting the resources and the effort in the way that we are in the state of Texas to do this. So I think we're ahead of the curve. We're at the cutting edge of the curve, so to speak.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little more. So when the EA first started, of course, we had we needed to permit the water and cap the amount of withdrawals that could take place. But that wasn't the end of the measures that we took to conserve and protect water. We were we are the member of the Habitat Conservation Plan. So, Roland, what other programs or initiatives does the EA have to conserve water at a time like this?
Sure, we have, in addition to just the critical period management reductions, which are regulatory, we have incentive programs. A lot of them are born out of the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan. We have the voluntary irrigation suspension program option, which pays irrigators, farmers to forbear or give up some of their water when you get to the worst of the droughts that we've had on record. And so this year was a VISPO year, and what that means is that we paid farmers who enrolled in the program to give up around 41,000 acre feet of their water this year. So that's on top of the critical period cutback. So you're doing work through regulation by cutting everybody back, and then you're incentivizing other specialized populations to give up some of their water, forbear their water. We've also done a lot of work through the years through doing what we can to incentivize improved efficiency, specifically in irrigation. So our goal has been for many years to try to replace outdated irrigation practices with higher efficiency practices and the technology that's now available to farmers, and that's been very, very popular. I don't see that going away. In fact, here of late, we've drawn attention from some partners in the corporate world who have stepped forward and said, "Hey, we like what you're doing, so let us contribute to that." So we've seen Microsoft, we've seen PepsiCo step up to the plate and want to contribute to that, and potentially that program could be self-sustained if we get enough partners that want to fund it, and then we don't have to bear the burden of that on our aquifer management fee rate. So there's a plethora of ways that we have started to help in the conservation arena. An area also where I think there's plenty to do, and that is in us playing a role as a facilitator or a resource in the region to help our permit holders in their quest to find alternative water supplies. Of course, our mission is very targeted. We can only regulate the Edwards Aquifer system, and but that limitation doesn't prevent us from being a help to our permit holders, especially our municipal purveyors, in helping them in their process to try to find alternative water resources that helps take some of the stress off of the Edwards, especially during drought. So, SAWS has been well known for kind of being at the leading edge of that, of diversifying their sources, developing aquifer storage and recovery, finding sources from outside the region and piping it in. And now we're seeing some similar work taking place out in the western part of our region in Medina County. We've done some work with New Braunfels on New Braunfels Utilities as they're testing different concepts about ASR there. So I think it's critical that we position ourselves as the experts on the Edwards to be a resource to those utilities in whatever way we can, going back to science, sharing our data, sharing our experiences with them in ways that help them make good progress towards being not just completely reliant on the Edwards, but find some of those other resources that they're going to need if they're going to continue to serve, their customers. And Texas is a tremendous economic generator as an economy, and all the political leaders like that, and I don't see that changing. They want people to come to Texas because Texas is a good place to live and work, and so because of that, I think we're going to have to be even more mindful than we have been about water resources and what can we do to extend the life of our resources and ensure that they're sustainable in the midst of all those challenges.
Mhm. And kinda going back to, talking about critical period management, I know that it was the first time in history that we declared stage 5, but Uvalde's been in stage 5 for about since April of last year, right?
Yeah, Uvalde's been in stage 5 for a while, and of course, that's a different pool
Mhm.
of the system, so it acts a little differently in Uvalde. They were in stage 5 back in the 2011 to 2014 drought as well, so it was ironic that we no sooner had we received a approved HCP and
Yeah.
incidental take permit, and Uvalde was in stage 5 because we started this HCP in the middle of a drought,
Uh-huh.
and here we are now trying to close out the HCP and move to the next iteration of the HCP,
Mhm.
and we're in drought. So,
Wow, yeah.
um, it's never easy,
Yeah.
but, that's why we do the work that we do
Yes.
because it's not easy work, but it's meaningful work.
I mean, drought is certainly tied to our landscape here too, where we are in South Central Texas. It feels like over the years since I've worked here, we've been in drought most of the time. But I look back and we pretty much have been.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There are also periods of extreme wetness as well. So it's kind of peaks and valleys. And the EA is designed to handle both.
Yep. I think you feast or famine,
Mhm.
depending on your view of that. But I do think that we see some things changing, and just anecdotally, uh, we we seem to becoming more arid, you know, uh, especially to the west, uh, and where the Chihuahuan Desert ends or not.
Mhm.
Maybe that's
Coming our way.
coming our way. I don't know, but that's time will tell. But
Yeah.
it seems like rain, when it looks like it's heading our way, diverts to the east more
Mhm.
often than not.
Mhm.
And I don't want to. I've heard all kinds of conspiracy theories out there, and I'm not going to lend any credence to them. Uh, but the reality is that things are changing. Things are changing around us,
Hmm.
and for whatever reason they are, we just need to be prepared uh, to continue to do our work,
Mhm.
irrespective of what those changes are.
And going back to the science that you were talking about in our nature-based solutions and land management practices, Brent, recently, the FRP with the rain events that we had, you saw some of those in action, right?
Yes, we had been designing and building some of these nature based solution structures and literally waiting years for a sufficient rainfall to have runoff and see them work. And so, Memorial Day of this year, that we had that. We had a 2-inch rain followed by a 3-inch rain that Roland spoke of. We hadn't had a rain like that since 2021.
Wow.
So it was pretty incredible. So we saw these structures in action, capturing and holding water, slowing down runoff that would typically just flow right into the streams and rivers and run off the recharge zone before it had time to really
Mhm.
help the system. So it was good to see it in practice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And if you can imagine, and I know it's hard to imagine, but if you can imagine acres and acres of those sorts of practices in
Mhm.
place across the region, then you start to think maybe we can make a difference.
Yeah.
Maybe we can really help nature do its best.
That's what I wanted to get into. So we had this 29 years of incredible history with the EAA, the difficulty of getting different communities and interests to work together to conserve and protect the aquifer. We had a permitting system in place. We had this first iteration of the ACP. So, Roland, where do we go for the next 29 years? What do you see?
Well, I think right in front of us right now, I think we need to get the next iteration of the HCP done and
Mhm.
put that away. And I say put that away. I think it's an ever evolving process because we're going to learn just like we did through this HCP process, this first 15-year term. We learned a lot of things, and we're going to continue to learn and apply best practices as we learn. But long term, I think our focus is more turned towards input to the aquifer
Mhm.
as opposed to output from the aquifer because the early part of our history was all about managing what's coming out, limiting what's coming out of the aquifer through pumping and getting that right. And I think we've done an excellent job. We've perfected that process, I think, pretty much as far as we can. So we can turn our attention now to, okay, what can we do in the watershed to the system to help? Can we enhance more recharge to the aquifer? Not only more, but protecting historic recharge. Because we know that with more population and with all that's happening around us, it's not so much enhancing the recharge or improving the recharge, but protecting what historically has happened so that we don't lose that. And so what does that mean? That means a whole other slew of work. And when I speak to recharge, I'm also talking about recharge that happens between aquifers, for example, Trinity and the Edwards. The Trinity, unlike the Edwards, is not regulated in the way that the Edwards is, and a lot of the growth that we've seen and anticipate to see is going to be over the Trinity. The question is, what does that mean for the Edwards? And I don't think we really can answer that with any level of definity, but we know that it's there. So I think we need to wrap our minds around that and do the best that we can to understand that, and probably be a voice for future policy, whether it's the EAA or just our state lawmakers, and have some level of science and data to share that can inform a process there. But beyond that, it's the work that we're doing at the Field Research Park and proving it up, qualifying it, validating it, and then figuring out ways that we can spread that across the region, because that'll help mitigate all those issues that we're talking about. It'll be it's not a silver bullet per se, but it's something that can help in that regard. What I like about that is that it puts us in a place to be partners with landowners. It puts us in a place to be partners with people of like mind who are concerned about preserving some of the more critical natural resources of the state within our region, and chief among them being water. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to move from just regulator to being partner, to being a collaborator. And that's another one of our core values, is we're going to be collaborative. So I think that's all in front of us. And I think that's where most of our focus is going to be.
Yeah, I like to think of them as tools in a conservation toolbox. Our critical period management is a big tool. Conservation easements supporting the city of San Antonio's Edwards Aquifer Protection Program. Nature-based solutions from the FRP, a longer-term and more certain HCP. All these are tools that build a more robust and rigorous toolbox for future work.
Yep. And with more tools, the end game is certainty, trying to ensure that, come what may all around us, that the Edwards, people have a certainty about the Edwards and its sustainability, that it's going to be there, and it's going to be reliable, it's going to be clean, it's not going to be compromised in any way. It's going to continue to be a reliable resource. Understanding we're going to need other resources to be just the Edwards long term, because, of the population growth.
And I know our work will outlive us, and so that next generation is a big component of what we do. What would you say for the next group of EAA employees that comes to this agency?
What I've said before when people come to work here is that our work is not instant work. It's for the long haul. It's legacy building. It's if you're interested in leaving a legacy, and what I mean by that is doing something that is going to have permanence beyond your time here, then this is a place where you can find that kind of work. And that means that there's not always a lot of glory in the work. It's, we're a political subdivision of the state. We're a public agency. So there's not glitz and glamour necessarily, but there's just good, solid, meaningful work that gives you a chance to do something that will outlive your time here. And hopefully the legacy is that you've left this natural resource in a better state than we found it. At least not compromised beyond where it was when you came here. But all that to say is that it takes a certain type of person to do that work. And I think over the years, that idea, and it goes back to the core values. Those core values have kind of taken root, and people that come to work here, I think, come with more of a preconceived uh, idea of what the work's going to be, more so than what once existed
Mhm.
in the past. I think people come here knowing more what we're about.
'Cause there's more certainty.
There's
Right.
and they've heard about us
Mhm,
more than
mhm.
they had in the past, and it's not. I just compare it to my experience before I came here, and I was a little weary of coming to work for the EA because of what the reputation out in the
Mhm.
West. I'm from out in the western part of the region, and um, there was some trepidation, but I got good advice, and it told me that there's good people that work there, and they're just doing their job, they're doing their work, and they're trying to do the best they
And
can.
maybe you can make it better.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and earlier in our talk, Brent made mention of people, and honestly, that's what kept me here was people.
Mhm.
There's people that there's a camaraderie that develops when you're doing work, when you're like-minded about the work, and there's there's a there's a sort of sense of personal ownership in the work. And there's a connection with the people that you regulate. They're not just, uh, you're just not regulating unknowable, unidentified numbers in a database. They're people that we see. I have to see them when I'm out and about in the community.
Yeah.
And they know, and I know that they're permit holders, and they know what my job is. And so there's an accountability that's there. And
Mhm.
I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think we're more recognized now, and they recognize that having to cut back during a drought makes sense for everyone.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's not something onerous that only one person is doing. It's the entire community is cutting back at
Right.
this time.
I think the word for that is stewardship. There's a greater stewardship that's commonly held. And I was telling somebody earlier today, I think the stewardship has moved to a point where now out there in the community, some people hold each other accountable for that. When they see someone watering at unusual times of day at the height of summer,
Mhm.
you know, they'll hold each other
Yeah.
accountable to where someone else doesn't have to do it. So
Yes.
I think the more people take care of their own selves,
Mhm.
the easier our job becomes.
Yeah.
So an educated public that understands why we do what we do means that our work moving forward will be easier from that respect.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roland, for being here and sharing the message today, talking about the 29 history of the EAA and what's to come in the future. So we really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank
Enjoy it.
you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. Have questions, ideas for topics, or things you would like to share with us? Well, reach out to us by emailing us at rechargezone@edwardsaquifer.org. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can have our next episode delivered right to you.